Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are tonight's entertainment.
Sound good?
Yes, sir! I know who I am!
Did IQs just drop shot while I was away?
I have a plan. I like this shit.
You know, it's
Dance off, bro.
It is your
Me and you.
destiny.
Welcome to the Atlantic Screen Connection podcast.
Let the games begin.
Hello and welcome to episode 10 of the Atlantic Screen Connection podcast with Jason and Lee. I'm Jason.
I am Lee.
And for this week, we get to start with my good mood, finally.
No more jaded Jason.
This week I am born again because I got to sit down and watch two Paul Thomas Anderson movies, namely Hard 8, aka Sydney, and Boogie Nights. Two movies that I fucking adore. Yeah, we're going to be having a blast today, and I think you were talking to me last week, Lee, and said to me that this was your first time watching Paul Thomas Anderson movies. So roundabout, did you have a pleasant experience without getting into too much detail?
Yeah. You don't know what to expect when you're told this guy's famous for reasons that you can't visually see. You know, like
Right.
I've never seen one of his films, so you know, like what am I to expect? What's brilliant look like? You know, what does visionary look like? So I didn't really know what exactly to expect at all. I will say, in broad terms, I was surprised. It's hard to say you don't like them. I mean, specifically these two films, I really enjoyed. I don't know if I err towards greatness, kind of, but I would definitely say...
No, I understand.
Structurally, just fun films I enjoyed watching, and I will remember for a long time. And what more can you ask for a film?
Yeah, exactly. But these, in my opinion, these two films are his most accessible. So
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see where we go from there. But yeah, we just also wanted to quickly put a little disclaimer out. Lee and I will be absent next week. There's a big conflict in scheduling right now. I am still a little bit swamped in work, which is a sad thing right now. And Lee's going to be out of town. We tried our best to try to put a show together, but we will be back most likely. I think we have scheduled for the week that we will be back is going to be for...
Yeah, it's going to be for Jack Reacher Never Look Back? Is that what the sequel's called?
Yeah, Never Look Back, which is a perfect title for a sequel. That means they're basically telling you don't watch the first movie because it's going to be exactly the same.
Oh, yeah. So I'm going to definitely be watching the first movie and then going to be watching that.
Oh, yeah. It's fun to me because I enjoyed the first Jack Reacher.
I remember liking it.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to this next installment. So we're sorry in advance for not being able to be there next week. And so in order to kind of, just so that we can keep the Paul Thomas Anderson retrospective in line with what we want to do, we are going to be skipping What Did You Watch This Week?
That's right.
And we'll bring that back with Jack Reacher when we get back to our normal schedule. So every second week, we're going to be talking about Paul Thomas Anderson. We're going to launch directly into his movies. I think that what I'd like to do right now is just plug in the trailer for Sydney. Let you guys chomp down on that. If you haven't watched it yet, press pause on the show, go watch it, and then come back and sit down to hear what we have to say about it. So without further ado, here's the trailer.
If I were to give you $50, what would you do with it?
I'd eat.
How long can you eat? How long can you live on $50?
I don't know.
I would bet not very long. It's always good to meet a new friend.
Oh, you took care of him?
John is a very old friend.
I think he's pretty adorable the way he follows you around and looks up to you.
Hello.
Hi. I don't do anything that I don't want to do. You understand?
Says you remember, Jimmy. Friend lives up there.
I saw you playing crap over the original Doom. Bet the Hard 8 for 1,000 and you pressed it for 2.
Stupid bet.
He thinks you don't like him.
I don't.
I know some things about Atlantic City. You walk around like you're Mr. Cool, Mr. Wisdom, but you're not. You're just some old hood.
Please do not put a bullet in me.
I love you, Sid.
And please don't tell John what I've done.
So you think what? That you can just walk through this life without being punished for it?
That is my hope. I don't want to die.
Philip Baker Hall, John C. Reilly, Gwyneth Paltrow, and Samuel L. Jackson. Hard 8.
Excellent. I hope you guys enjoyed the trailer for Sydney, or Hard 8. Sorry, I'm calling it by both names. It's the same fucking movie.
Yeah, I only learned about this just before we started the show, actually, so we should clarify that. The original screenplay, the original movie, and even the edited version of that original movie were all called Sydney. And then, last-minute decision to try and sell the film in a live, die, repeat sort of style, they changed the name to Hard 8. And that's all I knew of the film, that's all I knew it was called, so this is a total revelation to me.
It was hard to sell under the name Sydney, and Paul Thomas Anderson had a lot of trouble with one of the producers called Robert Jones on the film. And I mean, the first cut of Anderson's film was 2.5 hours long, and he wanted to keep it that way, but it was a very, very difficult sell. I don't remember what festival he was having trouble at. Anyway, they trimmed it down to the version that we have now, which is an hour and 40 minutes. So they cut literally an hour out of the movie. And so because they wanted to maybe sell it more as a gambling picture, they decided to slap the title Hard 8 on, which Anderson didn't particularly like, and he actually disliked the movie for years, but apparently he's come to like it quite a bit from now.
I was going to say, I hope so, because if there's one thing I liked about this film that I think is hard to debate, I would say it's its brevity. You know, I actually incredibly appreciate that we spend just enough time with these characters, but not too much. You know, I feel like the longer we could have spent in this world, a little more unraveling would have happened that I don't think we needed, per se. But maybe we should do a rundown of what the story's about. So, the film Sydney follows a man named John, who is sort of down on his luck and picked up by a mysterious stranger from Las Vegas called Sydney, who offers to give him money and teach him his ways in order to sort of make a living for himself. Eventually, you know, they form a friendship. The film jumps then 2 years later to see that they've sort of made a living for themselves in Las Vegas, and it more or less just explores the ins and outs of their lives and a couple of events that happen when they live in and out of these casinos. Without going into much further detail, that's pretty much it. In fact, even if we told you what happened next, that's pretty much it.
Okay, so anyway, spoiler alert, there you go. From here on out, it's just going to be us dissecting the movie for what it is. All right, so cool. So let's first and foremost then get into... did you like the picture?
I really liked the picture. Far more than I thought I was going to after maybe the first 5 minutes, because the intro really scared me a little, because it felt amateurish in a sense that it was literally for the first 5 minutes like a table conversation that any stage play or budding screenwriter does to sort of establish characters or a plot, and I in the wrong hands, and it's more often in the wrong hands than it is in the right hands. That makeup, that setup just doesn't work for me. I find it lazy. At the same time, though, the scene hadn't ended before I flipped at least not 180 but 90 degrees on the matter, because it had a favor in having incredibly interesting characters right off the bat, and a little mystery about who they were and what this was that I would say don't really get explored. But even still, I enjoyed our introduction, and after that point I ended up really enjoying the film, and specifically because of these characters. So that's generally my take was on the up after the first 5 minutes, which I understand could be entirely off-putting to people who, if they get that far and they go, eesh, don't know. Good news, after the first 5 minutes it gets better.
I really appreciated the first 5 minutes of the movie. It really got me into it. I like the first tracking shot where we're actually privy to seeing John C. Reilly leaning up against the coffee shop. And you have the coffee shop up on top on a giant billboard, like it's a trucker's stop, right? And seeing Philip Baker Hall kind of just enter the scene, and you only see his reflection in the door. I thought it was a clever way of introducing this guy. Like it's like a ghost that's coming back from something,
definitely.
And I thought characterizing him that way was very, very efficient and and interesting, where he was actually going to be this guardian angel showing up in a door window to come help this guy that's down on his luck. So I was like, wow, this is kind of interesting. It feels like a fairy tale a little bit. And I also was having fun listening to the audio commentary of Sydney, and Anderson mentions that it took him about 2 weeks to write the script.
Sure.
And the funny thing about what he says is that he says that if you are sitting down to write a script and you don't know what you're writing, then put two people in a coffee shop and have them start talking, and eventually it'll figure itself out.
Yeah.
He says if you know one of the characters, then he'll be your guide, and he'll just kind of let the story kind of evolve around him. When I heard him say that, I thought it kind of mirrored a little bit of what Jean-Luc Godard used to do with the French New Wave. He used to come on set for like Band of Outsiders or even Breathless, and he didn't exactly have a written script. And he would just not write anything. He'd buy newspapers, give them to the actors, and he'd have them read the newspapers. He'd film that. But then some of the conversations that the actors would have after would end up in the movie. And I thought that it was interesting to see how Anderson would kind of develop a scene based on a character in a coffee shop and what that person would talk about, the same way that Godard would kind of improvise a scene on set in the 60s while he was making his movies. The whole coffee shop, to me, starting Sydney, is Paul Thomas Anderson paying tribute to a lot of film history in terms of where his influences are. So you'll have like coffee scenes in Godard's 2 or 3 things about her. In Band of Outsiders, just before the dance sequence, they're in a coffee shop. In Vivre sa vie, you'll have, I forget her fucking name. I shouldn't. It's one of my favorite films. And, they're in a coffee shop where she's about just to mingle with a guy because she's entering prostitution, and Godard films them from the back, and they're in a coffee shop talking. You'll also have Truffaut's Mississippi Mermaid that has a really interesting coffee shop scene. And not to mention Bob Rafelson's coffee shop scene with Jack Nicholson in 5 Easy Pieces. So you have this interesting aspect where the coffee shop plays a big, big part in a lot of influential movies, not to mention Reservoir Dogs, at the beginning of Reservoir Dogs, and also Pulp Fiction. So they start at the diner, smoking, having coffee, and I thought that it was kind of uncanny to see how Tarantino and Paul Thomas Anderson kind of incorporate these old influences into these new movies. So for me, that's why the coffee shop sequence worked. I was looking at this and I was like, oh, Jesus, this guy knows what he's doing. So it was kind of fun.
A thing that I kind of thought about the coffee shop scene, I get that it's a reference. My thinking on it is the neat screenwriting trick. It's if you're not taught it, it's something you learn to do, I find, because if you want to write 2 characters and you want to get a sense of how those characters would enact with each other, it doesn't have to be in a coffee shop, mind, but you want to put them in a scenario where you give them something to feed off and then have what their reactions would be to that, what makes them different, and then how they might interact against each other. So, it's a simple practice. It's something that pretty much anybody who wants to write does at some point. My thinking on it, though, is that I just wouldn't put that in the movie,
Okay.
But at the same time, that's an initial bias, mostly on my part, and I would feel that even if you weren't a screenwriter, if you were just a general viewer of this film, there's something pretentious about opening a film where it's just dialogue between 2 characters. Give me a smoke, I want a coffee, I'm a little sad, this is how I feel, you don't know how I feel, everything's very easily expressed by the characters. It could be, it's a jump start to the tone of the film, and that's going to be off-putting for a lot of people, and it was kind of like that for me. I felt like it was trying to get across a sense of cool way too early.
Okay.
It's something like a sense that these characters, they didn't have to speak much. It was, this is how real people talk. That's the vibe we're going for. Which is, again, I thought was initially off-putting. But what really turns it around, the character of Sydney, just initially, I was so intrigued by the premise. That this mysterious benefactor comes into a shop, sits the guy down, and just tries everything in his power to try to win him over, or to help him in some way. That concept, it was surprisingly something I hadn't seen in a film, which is really strange. Like, kindness is not a big thing in films, even when the plot goes where it goes.
Yeah, exactly.
That's not what you're given at the start, and it's certainly not something I was expecting to get any resolve on. I just thought kindness for kindness' sake was going to be kind of the point, but man, I was so taken by that. It seems so alien to me that there could be a film where a guy just goes out of his way to help people for no particular reason. that immediately allure me, and Philip Baker Hall plays it so damn well. Like, he just so interestingly expresses both like dogged exhaustion and like warm kindness that I just immediately was taken like, this guy's got a fucking story, man.
That's what's impressive. I mean, even Paul Thomas Anderson, when he started like film school, he used to work on television sets early on,
right?
And that's where he met Philip Baker Hall, and he'd always been a Philip Baker Hall fan, and he talks about it again on the audio commentary. He says that the first thing that he went to say to Philip Baker Hall when he was on set to on a TV series, he walked up to him and said, "I'm going to make you a star." With all the enthusiasm of a film student, you know, and like, my God, I can't believe that people don't know who you are. And so when he was writing his short film, which is Cigarettes and Coffee, which later developed into the movie Sydney, it was a tribute to Philip Baker Hall, because he'd always been intrigued in Philip Baker Hall and what that guy could exude as a character. And this is after seeing him in Robert Altman's Secret Honor. It's basically one-man play that Altman filmed where Philip Baker Hall plays Richard Nixon. And if you haven't seen that, it's worth your time. It is a very strange movie, but it's a really interesting character study at the same time. And so I love the fact that you're saying that you were intrigued by him, because that's what Anderson was trying to go for when he was making Sydney. He was like, I love Philip Baker Hall. This is his fucking movie. I am going to make him a star. And that's what you get from it. You watch this guy, and there's so much eloquence in that man's face. And his body language throughout the movie is beautiful.
Even his voice is so dulcet and like soothing. It's amazing. You know what? It's great to hear, because nothing's shown brighter than the clear love for Philip Baker Hall in this film. It's great to hear that was an intention, you know, and not just something I was like, wow, they really let this guy get away with whatever he wanted, because like they sure love him.
Oh yeah, it's odd, because I mean, to me, like, before watching Sydney, the only time I think that I had seen him, because I watched Sydney later. I mean, I'd seen Boogie Nights at this point. I'd also seen Magnolia, and I'd also seen Punch Drunk Love, and then I realized, oh shit, I haven't watched this feature of his, so I'll go back and watch that. But I mean, Philip Baker Hall, other than seeing him in Boogie Nights, I had seen him as the weird police librarian in Seinfeld, where he's just insane going after Seinfeld to get him to pay, you know, some fee, I think, that it was overdue and stuff like that. So I was like, what the hell is this guy? You know, and I don't want to see him ever again as an actor. But then when you realize, oh my God, he was interesting on Seinfeld and funny for his intensity. He's actually a really intense actor, in my opinion. When you watch him in Sydney, you're like, motherfucker, you are amazing.
And I like the way that it sets him against John, who, by sheer contrast, and for the purpose of the story, is a doddering, not too interesting guy, you know, and that is kind of into his character. He needs to look pale in comparison to Sydney. And fucking John C. Reilly, I didn't realize it immediately at first. That first scene, I was kind of like, well, somebody's not catching the tone, you know, about his performance. Yeah. But fuck, man, as you watch the film, it unravels that John C. Reilly's character, he's playing a part, you know, he's playing it damn well, you know. I was very surprised here.
It's the basic evolution of becoming a gambler, but at the same time, if you're able to hustle even the people you're around, it turns that performance into something that's actually kind of golden, you know. And John C. Reilly is essentially showing that he can gamble not only with who he is, but with his personality. It's absolutely wonderful as a performance as it grows throughout the movie.
Yeah, definitely.
There's a sadistic vulnerability about him, which is very weird to me.
Definitely, yes, absolutely. There's this sort of puppy dog awe when it comes to Sydney, but all the other edges tell you he's just a little shaky, a little seedy. There's something about him that's just it's not 100%, you know, adoration. He's just a little bit of a dick. But that's one of the things I really adored about this film, is that nothing is just given to you past that intro.
Okay.
This is not a story about a gambler who, you know, gets an addiction and fucks up constantly. It's not one of those like on the nose moral tales. It's not an easygoing piece about like finding families and the ones you meet and so on like that. There's nothing so clear cut about it. What it is closer to like a bunch of interesting conversations with some slightly underdeveloped characters. I mean, I don't mean that they're underdeveloped, I just mean we're not shown their development a lot, which means that we kind of piece together who they are literally from what they're saying, and that to me was like a fascinating process. I loved trying to unravel who these people were, what the point of us watching them was, because the film doesn't seem interested in telling us or making a story out of them to actually, you know, keep us invested. It's more about just sort of, it's almost a documentary and how it's just about a thing that happened, you know?
It's an instant in somebody's life. Only it happens at one specific moment that defined 2 years later, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's planting the seed of potential in somebody, and then after that, helping him out, right? And it's kind of funny because what you're describing to me is one of Anderson's main motifs throughout his entire filmography, which is the idea of family and surrogate families.
Yeah. Well, that definitely comes in on Boogie Nights. That's
exactly.
For sure.
But I mean, even with Hall and John C. Reilly's character, that is a surrogate family, right? So we talked about spoilers earlier. Sam Jackson's character, essentially Jimmy, comes and tells us at one point that he knows that Sidney killed John's father by shooting him in the face. And Hall probably, I mean, exploring what an old man feels like. I'm not old yet, but I'm getting there, where you don't want to die with any sort of regret or remorse or anything that's going to make you feel guilty for how you lived your life. And leaving this guy, essentially finding him at a truck stop outside with barely any money left in his pockets, he feels a little responsible because he took that guy's youth away from him. He's had to probably do what he had to do. So you have this orphan-like character, and Hall, essentially, Sidney, decides to be a surrogate father, which is something, again, that we're going to explore in Boogie Nights a little bit later, with Jack Horner being a father to Dirk Diggler. So, I thought it was cleverly handled in Hard Eight. It's not overexposed. I'm pretty sure that the 2.5 hour cut probably
exposes it a little more.
Delves in that relationship quite a bit. We probably get a lot more backstory.
And that's what I'm saying about the brevity being its greatest factor, is that I didn't want to be told that. I wanted to experience it, and we are given just enough to know that these characters love each other in a very familial way without having to be outright explained, by the way, you're a surrogate father. You know, like, it never goes that direction. It's hinted at. Gwyneth Paltrow's character hints at the, you know, he adores you, he finds you fascinating to Sidney about John. But beyond that, the only thing that really references it is the fact that Sidney kills John's father, and that sort of touching final phone call between John and Sidney, that's sort of heartbreaking, them professing their love for each other. You know, you get obviously that's as close to being on the nose as the film goes, but even then, that's speaking way more about what's not being said, which in this case is he's not admitting that he killed his father.
No, he's not. And I mean, I would have loved to see the original script of this, because I think that Anderson probably wrestled with the idea at one point, like, does Jimmy tell John, and then is there something that ensues? Does John finally decide to play Sidney, and he's known all along? You know, I mean, that would be an easy way to have that reversal in the end, right?
Exactly.
But I don't know.
There's something to be said about ambiguity in storytelling and letting us tell the bits in between. Now, this could be done like awfully. Like this, it's one of the trickiest things for a filmmaker to do, is give us a story, leave portions out, and just put faith in the fact that the audience can make up the rest. You know, ambiguity is a tough tool to play with, and here I think it's done perfectly. The parts that we miss are just the parts we don't need.
It's a very lean film.
Definitely. We don't need 2 years. I mean, I'm sure the original screenplay said 2 years later, and that was it. We don't need that 2 years. I think Anderson admits that this is a story with gaps, and that's why he probably made some peace, if not initially, then eventually, with the fact that the story has notable gaps in its telling. For example, we miss John and Clementine's day out to the mall. We miss all the sort of drama that goes on there. There's whole gaps. Whether it was written or not originally, that's left out for us. What you said there about Jimmy and his influences, there's definitely much more to that. There's, whether he gets told about Sidney, I would imagine the original story would be smart enough not to just tell us, by the way, he killed your father, and then we lose all intrigue altogether in the story and the revelation later on. But at the same time, there's definitely more to that relationship. There's more to how they got to know each other and the influence Jimmy plays and the secret times they have alone. There's definitely more there, but we don't need to even know it. We can imagine it. I think that when it comes to the sort of the meaningful, climax of this story, in that heartfelt conversation, that it being a film with gaps up until that point, that the most important things to say are cut out, and that the important thing that they say is "I love you," that seems ultimately meaningless next to the truth, in a sense. I mean, that's a pretty big statement to say about love, I suppose, but also...
Yeah, the different shades of it, right? The idea that I love you enough to not hurt you and hurt myself in the process.
Yeah, that's exactly another thing, though. It is the better way to go as a story. Sometimes we can either just accept known facts, or sometimes we can just try to protect each other from things that are just going to cause us more pain for no reason, maybe.
Oh, yeah, but there's
a lot of reasons why we can argue Sydney made the decision not to tell the truth, and that we can sort of justify that to the character is just wonderful storytelling.
Oh, it's interesting. I mean, it's the Obi-Wan, from a certain point of view. It's one of these father figures that essentially is saying, you'll know the version of the truth that you need to know in order to continue living as who you are. Our parents do that to us when we're growing up as well.
Definitely.
They hide so much shit from us because they're trying to protect us from the world. And it could actually be things that they've done or they don't necessarily like about themselves. They don't want us to be them. They want us to be us. And if it's hiding us from them and what their true nature is, then so be it. And I think that Sydney does that very well for John.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Cool. Let's briefly touch on favorite parts of the movie. Is there a specific scene for you that stuck out? Or a performance?
Well, yeah, I'll go for two scenes. Right. One, I'll just very briefly talk about the introduction to the casino itself with Sydney teaching John the ropes. I think that was a tremendous way to explore the world that they were about to spend the remainder of the film in. That the tricks behind it, the characters that embody it are all there, and they're shown here in like shorthand. We're given the manager who overlooks it all, the seediness, the suspect nature of it all, but also the fallibility. That it has its exploits, even in its corruption. Right. It sets a tone so perfectly, and that was what where the diner scene did well enough job establishing the characters. That's where we really see them shine, and that to me made the film. The only other thing was the inevitable. I mean, there's obviously a bunch of scenes that all kind of make a blur of beautiful movie making, but the final scene of Sydney taking Jimmy down, like waiting for him. Yeah. To me, that was what's so weird about seeing that scene made so many years before Drive. And that we have a short film, both are short films, but a slow plotting film about characters that just out of nowhere takes a right turn into just violence, and badassery for absolutely negligible reasons. That is something I really enjoy. That, and then that he just sort of dusts it off, and we get this heartwarming conversation. To me, that scene, it wasn't important to the film, but it's as close to an identifiable style that Hard Eight ever has.
Right.
And there's something I find very thrilling about cinema in that particular moment.
But you're right. I mean, it is cinema. I completely agree with you, on what you're saying right now. But I just want to go back quickly to the casino scene because to me that was Sydney basically showing John the circle of life. The idea that you go here, you work, and then after that you go punch in at the end of the day, and then you go back to work, and then you punch in at the end of the day, and then you go back to work, and you punch in at the end of the day, and then at the end of it, he's like, "Is this what you want to do forever?" And he's like, "I guess not," And so it's kind of fun because it's basically him teaching him what the ropes are, not necessarily in the casino, but in life in general. You can go in this circle of life bullshit if you want to, but it would be good for you to kind of get out and see something else. It's kind of interesting how that first element, that first thing in the movie, is basically saying, "Okay, you have a choice. You either get in or you get out."
That is the perfect way to read that. I hadn't put it into such terms or thoughts before, but it brings the warmth and ties the whole thing together so nicely. I love that viewing of it. It's great. But what about you? Favorite scenes?
Oh, well, mine is more of a technical scene. The way that Anderson, I love how Anderson uses the camera. Whenever you're hearing a good song or something like that, which in my case is heavy metal most of the time. Sorry for people out there. But, whenever I'm listening to something, it's something that soothes me. And watching a Paul Thomas Anderson movie soothes me because I am watching cinema. And one of the little sequences that I adored was when we meet Sam Jackson's character for the first time, when they all go sit down at the table where Sydney's playing Keno, and then John is going to introduce Jimmy to Sydney. And they're all sitting at this table, and the way that Anderson uses his camera is very, very, I thought it was very beautiful.
Yeah.
Table conversation is normally not interesting. You know, you'll have two powerhouse actors, let's say in Michael Mann's Heat, where you're going to have this reverse shot, where you'll have Al Pacino and Robert De Niro, and all you need is their body language and the conversation, because it's well written. And Michael Mann decided, I don't need to make any move. But Anderson himself in this sequence decides to have a little bit of fun, because Philip Baker Hall isn't necessarily intrigued to knowing what kind of person Jimmy is. He's more interested about seeing if he's actually going to make any money. Yeah. And Anderson needs to take him out of the conversation, and he does it using camera moves. The conversation between Hall and Sam Jackson starts with an over-the-shoulder shot. It's over Jackson's left shoulder. And then Anderson decides to crab right and uses a focus pull into a two-shot of Jackson and Riley that are talking with Hall in the background that's now out of focus. Then they exchange a cigarette. They have this little conversation. And then once Jimmy gets a little bit of a feel for who Hall is, Anderson moves the camera back by crabbing left with a focus pull, going back to the initial position of an over-the-shoulder shot to reestablish the conversation between Jackson and Hall. I thought that sequence just livens up the conversation, shows you a little bit of how Riley and Jackson's characters interact, and how Jackson might actually be approaching Hall's character from that moment on.
Yeah.
And so to me, it just goes to show how much of a responsible director Anderson is to be able to have that forethought into saying, okay, I need to kind of establish this 3-character conversation around a table. How can I do that with just a couple of camera moves in order to show who these people are?
Yeah.
And I thought it was really, really a fun way to do it. And so that shot, to me, I was watching it again, and I remember seeing it the first time and going like, oh, beautiful. And then I watched it again just recently so we could do the show, and I was like, God damn it, it's even better this time around. It's so wonderful.
Great. And I like that. I like the efficiency of it as well. I think that that it breaks it into the separate dialogues while also maintaining that 3-person structure. At the table.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's very clever.
That's it. And I think one of the other things that I appreciate about the movie is Philip Seymour Hoffman.
I didn't think we'd sneak away without a Hoffman reference.
It's beautiful. And I think it's a great segue into Boogie Nights, where Philip Seymour Hoffman's character in Sydney is this extroverted, talkative guy that kind of reminds me of Negreanu, this Canadian gambler down in Las Vegas now who's made millions of dollars, who just won't shut the fuck up at the poker table. And so you'll have Philip Seymour Hoffman's character, before Negreanu actually became popular, just fucking talking the entire time and just being this dick. He's an asshole, but he's fun to watch.
Yeah. It really livens up a very small character scene. It's a very strange scene in the film too, because it doesn't really have any bearing on what little plot there is already. I didn't know what the fuck to make of it. I was just having a good time.
Exactly, and I think that was the point. I mean, it's possible that what he's saying is basically John and Sydney might be a combination of this guy when they were young or something like that. But you never know. Just this hot-headed fucker, Which, again, is going to be interesting for us to explore, because in Boogie Nights, it's the complete opposite. Introverted guy. He plays these two polar opposite characters in movies that are back to back, 96 and 98, where you're like, how the hell did you do this? This is amazing. He goes to show just how great an actor Philip Seymour Hoffman was. And he's sadly missed now, because his performances were really, really interesting.
Definitely. So
I don't know. Do you have anything else to say about Sydney, dear sir?
I am happy with Sydney. I would recommend it to people who haven't seen it. I'd say stick through the first 5 minutes, because it can be a bit off-putting, but it gets into itself, and don't expect a plot. What we described sounds like there's a lot of plot happening. There isn't. There really isn't.
No, it's a series of events. It's not really that detailed. I mean, it's about a guy that's basically trying to make a living in casinos, and he just happens to meet a guy who's essentially his guardian angel, but he's also the devil because he shot his father in the face. So
that's simplification for you. Elegant.
There you go. That closes out our conversation on Sydney, or as you guys are going to rent it, Hard 8 by Paul Thomas Anderson. We hope you enjoyed this little part of the retrospective, and stay tuned for our take on Boogie Nights. Here's the trailer.
Everyone's given one special thing, right? Everyone's blessed with one special thing. I want you to know I plan on being a star. A big, bright, shining star.
Eddie Adams from Torrance.
Yep.
Jack Horner, filmmaker. I make exotic pictures.
In 1977, a kid from nowhere.
Maybe think about your name.
My name, yeah.
Something a little pizzazz.
Dirk Diggler. Good name.
I like your name a lot.
Had a dream of getting somewhere.
Jack Horner has found something special in newcomer Dirk Diggler.
So let me just pop in this 8-track, and you just give a listen and tell me what you think, okay?
It was a time when disco was king.
These are the ones. These are great.
Yeah, those are really cool. Are they lizard?
No, they're Italian.
Do you like my shoes?
They're pretty cool.
Sex was safe.
Woohoo!
Pleasure was a business.
Cut. Terrific. Nice work.
And business was booming.
And the award for Best Newcomer goes to Mr. Dirk Diggler.
Wow.
Goodbye, 1979. Hello, 1980. Are you ready?
But in 1980,
Come on, you puppies!
the party was over.
You are fired. What? You're fired.
It's jealousy, it's deceitfulness, it's vindictiveness. But, I mean, God, what can you expect when you're on top?
Oh, wait. Love this part.
New Line Cinema presents a portrait of 2 decades in the life of a business, the days of a dreamer, and the nights in between. Boogie Nights.
And we're back. I hope you enjoyed the trailer for Boogie Nights, movie that came out in 1998. Again, directed by Paul Thomas Anderson, because that's what we're doing right now. Starring Mark Wahlberg, Burt Reynolds, Julianne Moore, Heather Graham, John C. Reilly, Philip Baker Hall, and a slew of other characters. Don Cheadle's in there too. Philip Seymour Hoffman. Yeah, Jesus, this is an ensemble cast. So the story basically takes place in the 1970s in San Fernando Valley, the capital of porn in the 70s, where people were making porns apparently everywhere. And it's the golden age of the porn industry, where you'll have a guy who essentially is Dirk Diggler, who becomes a famous porn actor because of the size of his penis. A lot of people want him in the porn industry because apparently he has something wonderful just being wanting to come out into the world, as Jack Horner, Burt Reynolds says so eloquently while the guy's washing dishes at the back. And so, yeah, it's basically the rise and fall of a man in the porn industry. So, Lee, what did you think of Boogie Nights?
Again, I didn't have much expectations on this one. It's very clear right off the bat that Paul Thomas Anderson has become the competent director with the competent statement that he wanted to be. This definitely screams my debut, in inverted commas, where the director feels, I finally made a film that I could call my first film, and they disregard the previous effort.
Yeah, I agree.
This screams that, it's got everything going for it. It really feels like an accomplished movie. Generally, I really like this film. I didn't expect myself to like it. Not because of the porn elements. I actually thought that was fascinating and fun. But I didn't expect to like it because, I don't know, I don't like rise and fall stories. And it's true, that's, to me, the worst part of this film is the fact it's a rise and fall story. It's such a predictable narrative, and it's not that we can't have these stories, it's just not something I want to watch. This is like saying Act 1, up to Act 1, good times. Yeah. Act 2, bad times. Act 3, some sort of middling, jarring mix of the three. And I get it, and it works. It works pretty well to tell the story that needs to be told for these characters, and also to be a sort of era-appropriate retelling of what happened to the porn industry at that time.
Right.
It works really well on that level. But it's not how I like... It's not a film... Ultimately, it means it's not a film I'm going to be rewatching anytime soon, because I don't like suffering the unsufferable lows,
Yeah, I get it. I understand. Makes sense.
But ultimately, overall, I had a great time. I laughed. The low parts are genuinely fascinating, and most importantly, like with Hard 8, I just love the characters. And I love spending time with them. And that's something in these first two films with Paul Thomas Anderson. I'm very happy to see. A lot of what makes great directors and a lot of critics' eyes are their capabilities with camera work and their sort of their fuckery with storytelling. And I agree, those are things I like to see too, but what really gets me is characterization.
Right.
I don't really care as much for a well-shot film if I don't care who's in it, you know? And these two have been very positive for me when it comes to Paul Thomas Anderson, because it gives me faith that he knows people enough. And they're not like robot Hollywood people either. They're kind of real enough that they can be applicable to any walk of life. I'm fascinated with how he describes and tells characters on a screenplay. And for me, this has been an overall positive start to our Paul Thomas Anderson journey.
Yeah, okay. It only gets better from here, man.
Yeah, well, so I hear. But anyway, your thoughts then on Boogie Nights?
I'll start by saying that I separate Paul Thomas Anderson's career into three so far. I mean, he's directed a lot of videos, most recently for Radiohead. He's directed concerts. He has a documentary with Johnny Greenwood from Radiohead. Fiona Apple has always been one of his things that he had. You know, he went Prairie Home Companion. He helped Robert Altman. He was there to ensure, which is why there was a gap between A Punch Drunk Love and There Will Be Blood. You know, he was actually helping out and trying to learn more about filmmaking. And to me, the three phases that we've seen so far is that you're going to look at Hard 8, Sydney, and Boogie Nights, which are going to be his Scorsese pictures. And then you'll have the middle pictures right now with Magnolia and Punch Drunk Love, which will be his Robert Altman pictures. And then after that, the two last ones, excluding Inherent Vice, you'll have There Will Be Blood and The Master, which are going to be his Kubrick pictures. Inherent Vice, I'm eager to see where it fits in, because it seems like a mishmash of a lot of elements that we've seen so far from Anderson. You know, he'll have the long takes, he'll have the strange lighting that he's going to use, which are kind of homages to Scorsese, and also a little bit the way that he frames specific scenes in Inherent Vice are going to be very Kubrick-esque as well. However, with Boogie Nights, to me, this is where he feels the most Scorsese. And it's the one where he is actually saying, this is the side of the fence of in Hollywood I want to fall.
Right, great.
You know, you could look at like Coppola's movies from the 70s, and then you'll look at like how Steven Spielberg and the blockbusters and George Lucas and even De Palma was making trashy films and whatnot. Scorsese is the one that kind of sticks out more as the fringe director. De Palma is very competent, but Scorsese knows how to make a Hollywood picture that people are going to be, I like it, but it's not mainstream that much, you know?
Yeah.
And I feel that Boogie Nights fits that bill very well, because it is an homage to Scorsese, but it also is an homage to Hollywood itself, in my opinion, where Anderson chooses sex, Scorsese chooses violence. And to me, they are not mutually exclusive. There is a violence in sex, and there is a sexuality in the violence that Scorsese portrays on screen as well. And so I think that by peppering the sex throughout Boogie Nights, the way that Scorsese peppers the violence throughout, like Goodfellas, most notably Taxi Driver, and even Raging Bull to a certain extent, that you're going to see in this particular picture of Anderson's, they kind of push the envelope just a little bit farther than what most people would deem accessible, but they do make it accessible through what you described earlier, the characterization that they do so well.
It was kind of frightening, actually, that I was watching this film ostensibly about the porn industry, and I was thinking, how hasn't everyone seen this? How haven't we all? Why aren't we all talking about Boogie Nights all of the time? Because this feels like it's going to be one of those films everyone should have seen, everyone can relate to. You know, like, it's really strange, because then it lures you in so much into its characters that it makes you forget it's about porn, you know?
Well, that's the thing. That's what's weird. It does make you forget that it's about the porn industry at that time, because the characters are still relatable.
Yeah.
They're in situations we've been in. You know, I'm talking about emotionally, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Where you're
like, not specifically, but emotionally, definitely.
We've been in arguments with our parents before. We've tried to neglect whatever they've told us, you know, because we thought we were doing better. We thought we knew better. You know, the tantrums that we'd go through, this idea of also experience, you know, that comes with life, the choices that you choose to make and all that. These are all relatable qualities with the backdrop of porn. What the fuck, man? You know, and the fact that he can make these characters relatable, you're like, oh, it's really, it's kind of titillating and not at the same time, where you're like, how can I be associating to this motherfucker? It's not cool. It's not supposed to be right.
Definitely. And I love that that's also, it's funny how porn is portrayed in this film, because it's awfully sterile.
Okay.
It's awfully cold. It's very much a process. You know, and that's, I think, what supports your view that this is how they look at Paul Thomas Anderson views Hollywood.
Right.
Because the porn here is more about the filmmaking, the art of that, and the filming of the porn and the scenes in which the porn is portrayed. Isn't at all sexy. It's not.
No.
We're given almost like straight shots of it just happening, just to give us like it makes us detached from the actual action itself, you know, and that view is so funny. What it reminded me of the Coens, in that it captures their cynical tone.
Oh, beautiful!
And especially their adoration for filmmaking as a form. I prefer Anderson's view on the art of filmmaking, though. I think that, I don't know, by our surrogate into that world, which isn't actually, well, I mean, our surrogate into the being a part of it world is Dirk Diggler, but it's Jack Horner who's our visionary. He's our guy. You know, he is the medium of art in porn and in film incarnate,
right.
And he cares passionately about the medium, and he's our look at like the directors of that world and the skewed look at them. And I think there's something so warm and dignified in Jack Horner's portrayal that I don't think the Coen brothers have ever really tried to portray. They've done well with like portraying the people who are fascinated with film, but not the people who just embody it and get on with it, and function as a person beyond it as such. Right. I mean, it's not exactly a one-for-one comparison anyway. I mean, they're pretty much saying a lot of the same things around the same time as each other.
I get it. I mean, but you brought up Jack Horner, and I mean, if you look at Burt Reynolds' performance in this movie, it's probably the best I've seen Burt Reynolds be. And in the movies that you watched, I mean, yes, he was great in Deliverance, you know, but at the same time, when you see him, and even in Smokey and the Bandit, you're like, all right, cool, yes, he's a great actor, he's a fun actor, he's a guy that I'm not used to seeing that much of.
Yeah.
But in Boogie Nights, he's just like, he just owns it. Whenever he's on screen, you're like, my God, how can I not watch this performance? It's just so beautiful how he's able to portray this guy who's a little bit, I won't say blasé about his medium, but like you said, he's passionate about it and he cares deeply about what he's producing. He does not want to produce shit. He's tired of making shit. And so he's trying to boost his cred up a little bit as well, but it just so happens that it's not the right time anymore. There's a change that's about to happen. And sadly enough, the change is provoked by him finding Dirk Diggler, right?
No, exactly.
You know? And I mean, you know, when I was watching Boogie Nights, I think one of the reasons why Anderson chose to make this picture, other than the fact that he was subjected to it as a child, you know, being born in San Fernando Valley and seeing this go around his neighborhood, you know, on the commentary, I think, or even an article I read, I don't remember one of the two, he said that whenever a van pulled up in the neighborhood, they knew they were making a porno someplace, you know, a white van. And so that's how prominent it was in his childhood growing up. I think that he does see Hollywood as a place where they produce porn.
Yeah, almost certainly.
You know, the idea of voyeurism, in a sense, where the idea that we're going to pay these people so that we can just watch them do shit. You know, so there is a certain pornography in what we do. And it's kind of funny because Hollywood is a place where people have peculiar values that they think they know better than most people. And I'm not shitting on Hollywood. I love Hollywood. But they do constantly pet each other on the back, you know, and they swoon over their own ideas. And I think that, and I don't want to assume, I think that Anderson is kind of saying, yeah, I make porn too. And so
no, you're totally right though. That's something I meant to sort of say about Jack Horner's character as well, is that if we see him as the surrogate of the director, which in this case is Paul Thomas Anderson, and the fact he's like, I want to say something with the medium, you know, I want to really make porn a little more than what it is today. At the end of the day, it's still porn.
Yeah.
there's nothing he can do about that.
No matter how
it's
much
still
the
going to
story
be
is.
the medium it
exactly.
is. It's so perfect a mirror image of Hollywood that it can only reflect on Paul Thomas Anderson, given like a nudge and a wink at his own position and what he feels about the entire art form itself. I love that. It's not entirely on the nose, but it is very, tongue-in-cheek.
Oh, definitely. I mean, like, even when we're talking about Hollywood, I was reading an article written by Atalanta Copeman Pappas, and she says that Boogie Nights is essentially a commentary on scopophilia. And scopophilia, for people that don't know, is basically this idea of sexual pleasure derived from watching others when they're naked or engaged in sexual activity. So the idea that it's voyeurism. And I mean, if you break down what voyeurism actually is, it doesn't necessarily equate, just us watching people naked. It's essentially watching
it's not necessarily perversion,
right?
It's just it's the act of watching.
We all have that
definitely.
fucking neighbor who's always checking shit out where you're like, can you please leave me the fuck alone if I want to walk around
exactly.
my
Sometimes
my
it's just nosiness.
Exactly. And while I don't disagree with her, I mean, like I said, I really think that Anderson's making a movie about Hollywood itself, and the idea that, we were talking just before the show, the idea that we the penis, Dirk Diggler's penis becomes the center of attraction. The whole movie is about that. And she comes to the conclusion that Anderson cleverly puts the idea in people's head where it creates a whole mystery around the penis, where at the end of the movie, the audience, who is not an audience that is normally going to be gravitating towards porn, wants to see the dick. And I mean, I didn't get that. I didn't care because I was too involved with what the hell was going on, where I'm like, okay, yeah, he's got a big dick. We could see it a couple of times. I didn't need to see it flat out, and they do put it out there. And what I mentioned to you...
I totally agree with that. Yeah.
When I mentioned to you, I was like, I was comfortable with the fact that it was like the briefcase in Pulp Fiction, where it was just this MacGuffin carrying the movie around. I was like, okay, fine. Anderson's making fun of this idea that we're going to use the dick as a MacGuffin, and the whole movie is riding on this guy's dick. Ha 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 ha. Tongue-in-cheek reference.
But
you disagreed. You disagreed with me. You actually said that it worked for you.
I needed that.
We needed the dick.
I needed perfect. That dick. No, seriously though. I mean, I entirely agree. I had not read that article you were telling me before the show, but I entirely agree. And it was something I actually thought about at the time, that it was teasing this, and I just assumed that we were never going to get it. Very much like, I hadn't put two and two together, but very much like the briefcase in Pulp Fiction. Right. You're right. We don't need to see what's in it to enjoy the fact that it exists and its effect on the characters. I thought we were going to get a very similar treatment to fucking Dirk Diggler's dick. So, but at the same time, I was just like, God, wouldn't it just be great? In the back of my mind, going like, wouldn't it be great if we just had a moment? We undid this and just fucking saw his dick for a while, and that'd be that.
Yeah.
And Jesus Christ, we got it. We actually got it.
There's a payoff. And what did you call it?
A climax.
A climax,
because
that's what you got the money shot. It's there.
It's actually the climax of the film. It is incredible. It was something. Paul Thomas Anderson does build that tension.
Yeah.
I just assumed it would go somewhere, it would go nowhere because of what I was exposed to. But I definitely see where the teasing of it in a conventional story would expect you to get a payoff. Yeah. You just naturally assume the payoff's a dick. We're not getting that.
Exactly. Normally we wouldn't get
So when we get it, it was exactly what I wanted. And I kind of knew it and I kind of didn't, but and it was great. It made me laugh my ass off, and I was just so overjoyed that the story went there. I mean, it shouldn't be such a big deal that fucking the reveal of a dick is like a punchline and or anything regarding like interesting as an art movement or so on, or like a narrative payoff. But at the same time, the mundane can be made interesting by a well-told story.
Yeah.
And this to me is as mundane as it gets. I'm just so happy with how this film wrapped up.
I like that. I like the way it wrapped up, because for me, it wasn't even about the dick. It was about the film reference that he was making that I loved.
Yeah, I didn't get this.
But that's it to me. Like that scene at the end is taken directly from Raging Bull. There are two sequences where you have that. In Raging Bull, it starts and ends with the same scene, where you'll have Jake LaMotta, who's Robert De Niro at this point. Sorry about that. Jake LaMotta is never Robert De Niro. It's basically, so you have Jake LaMotta in the mirror saying, "I'm the boss, I'm the boss, I'm the boss," where you'll have Dirk Diggler being, "You're the star, you're the star, you're the star," and even using the title of the film, Anderson is playing on that notion tongue in cheek again. Get it? Raging Bull, a giant cock, a bull's cock that's going to be on screen, where it actually replaces this boxer like character, and the influence of Scorsese's there, and at the same time, it's a calling out to Jake LaMotta was a fighter, he's the guy that needed his fists in order to make a living, and then you'll have Dirk Diggler, who is exactly like this guy. He's also a fighter. He's a guy that needs to be there. And then brilliantly framed by Anderson that Dirk Diggler's head is not even on screen. It's exactly what it is. It's the penis, and that's exactly where he makes his living. Where Jake LaMotta uses his fist, Dirk Diggler loses his dick. Everyone has something special. That's the one thing that Dirk Diggler says throughout the movie. Everything has that one special thing. And I love that, how he uses Scorsese in that way.
I mean, not to continue this fucking gushing discussion on my penis, but I do want to point out that I also just actually love this ending from a character perspective as well. I mean, this to me, I don't think there was a more perfect way to wrap up Dirk Diggler's story.
Right.
This was, again, as I was saying, rise and fall. It's not that interesting to me.
Okay.
But as a midpoint, to find his own landing with his with a family that, like a surrogate family at long last, that sort of accept each other for all the same reasons that you thought they would, see them get back together in this way, and then to have this moment of him coming back to terms with what makes him special.
Mm-hmm.
After losing it for so long in the film, and to make peace on that level.
Right.
I just thought it's a surprisingly touching moment. It's kind of ballsy.
Yeah, it was great. And I mean, that's just one of the references I was talking about. I love that, how you pointed it out, that it brings that character arc to a close, and it brings it to a close in a way where you're like, okay, he's finally made peace with what he is, where he fits into the world. That even in the end of the movie, to kind of, how can I put it, have that closure for the character, it actually helps us understand we're not that different either.
Exactly. And what I liked about this, against what I like about Tarantino's films, Tarantino makes films that are a little more of a pastiche on character traits.
He also does delve into the familial aspect quite a bit as well. Like Reservoir Dogs, you'll have this group of people that are going to come together. Even in Pulp Fiction, you'll have these buddies that are going to blend together because there's an attachment that's there. Even in Jackie Brown, you have these meetings of people. Kill Bill, the group again, right? Even in Django Unchained, or even in Glorious Bastard, families are constructed based on common goals and things like that. And I think that Anderson, in this way, makes them a little bit more relatable, like you were talking about in Boogie Nights with the surrogate family. When you look at how Tarantino construct those things, yes, they come together for dumb reasons. They're going on a bank heist in Reservoir Dogs. They're gangsters together in Pulp Fiction. It's the circumstances that are bringing these ties together, which makes it a little bit surreal. And I understand where you're pointing out the pastiche, where we can't really relate to these guys. However, how Anderson does decide to attack the familial aspect in Boogie Nights does definitely make it relatable and less of a pastiche. So I completely agree with you on that. The idea of surrogate families, even loneliness and loyalty, I think are present in Boogie Nights as well as in Tarantino movies.
Definitely. I mean, like, what can you say about the relationship between Amber and Roller Girl? I mean, such a strange... That's the closest to pastiche, I would say, like, the idea of surrogate family gets, but the actual outcome of that is real. They do accept each other after that somewhat forced acceptance, and they stay together as a family. That smaller unit, they lose Don Cheadle's character, and they lose John C. Reilly by the end, but like they all go off into their own arcs, but the core of the gang stick together, and that kind of close-knit fabric. And Amber really does look at Roller Girl and Dirk as these kids of hers,
right?
But it's not played for laughs. It's not even played as a sort of sickened version. It's actually pretty sweet. It actually says a lot about parenting as well, and that even it doesn't matter who you are as a parent, you can still fuck your kids up a little. And in this case, it's with drugs.
Yeah, there's a lot of going in there, because to me, like, Boogie Nights felt a little bit like a tragedy. I mean, we could actually bring Oedipus Rex into this. The idea of Yocasta with Oedipus, you could actually even maybe look at Dirk's real mother. It's a very, very twisted family that Dirk actually comes from, where his father is helpless, and his mother, in my opinion anyway, wants something she can't have from him.
Yeah.
which
Well,
is
it's
a
entirely
physical
true.
relationship, right? And so to me, there's a clear jealousy that comes from that, and I'm positive that there's a psychological condition that exists because I did a little bit of research. I couldn't find anything. All I came on was the histrionic mother or the borderline narcissistic mother, where she's going to be all consuming of her son or daughter. And in this case, I thought that the mother herself was a little bit, I'll say intense just to stay polite, but I'm positive that she did want a relationship with her own son, which actually kind of mirrors the relationship that Dirk Diggler has with Amber a little bit later. The reconstruction of the family unit.
That's not something I would have picked up initially, but as you're saying it makes perfect sense to me. There's definitely something there, and it's a better reading of that scene between Dirk and his birth mother, and it kind of throws that sort of the physical nature of sex that this film is portraying as it throws so many other lights on it. That it's much like the film itself. It dodges the idea of porn as some sort of sexual act in itself or something, that's supposed to be overly intimate. It's often a cold workman's kind of relationship for a lot of the characters involved.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is also portrayed in that sort of inversion with how the characters kind of want from each other. That's pretty, that works on a level, and I think that something that ties that together is what you're saying about the initial mother scene. Because it kind of does say she wants something more from him, to be more, and that's an interesting way of looking at it. I never thought of it that way.
Because I picked up on it when she starts describing Dirk's girlfriend at the time as a little whore.
Yeah.
Right. So to me, when you're kind of debasing someone in order to maybe make yourself a little bit bigger because you don't understand the situation that you're in, that goes to show a lot of jealousy. Try to put yourself above who the other person actually is.
Yeah.
And the fact that the mother is actually trying to tear that girlfriend down to me is because that girlfriend has something she wants and she can't have.
Yeah.
Right.
No.
And so it was kind of interesting when I pieced it together a little bit as an Oedipus complex type of thing, or where Dirk actually does have sex with Amber, who would be his mother, and then eventually symbolically or metaphorically kills his father in the fact that when he does leave the studio after that, they switch to videotape and no longer film, so that it kind of kills the porn industry, the business itself. So there's a symbolic death in the art of filmmaking that is actually pioneered by Jack Horner. So I figured that it kind of builds into that tragic relationship that these people have with each other.
Definitely.
And it was kind of fun to kind of pick it apart and go like, oh, look at that. It is kind of tragic. And that's why this movie actually kind of works for me, where it plays off as a tragedy.
It is in that sense, the very particular fashion of saying it's even like a Shakespearean tragedy. You're entirely right. And again, that's a thing why I don't fucking casually watch or purposely watch a lot of Shakespeare adaptations, is because I'm not fascinated by rise and fall.
Right, okay.
Which is a big trope
sense.
in Shakespearean tragedy, It's
right.
Although, granted, Anderson, he makes it known that this isn't a tragedy, this is a comedy, just a really sad one. Very much like Shakespearean comedies, absolutely. Ultimately, it does have something of a bittersweet ending.
Yeah. It ends in a marriage. You're absolutely right. It does end in marriage.
Exactly, so
Diggler goes back to Horner, so you're absolutely right.
There's definitely some narrative that is being drawn on more, because I want to know a lot about Tom Jane's character in this film. To me, that character is not a character. He's like a representation of chaos in the structure of the story. He's not. We don't spend any time getting to know him. He shows up when things are from getting already from bad to worse, and ensures that the story goes to its lowest point.
Yeah, I mean
that to me, from just like from an inexperienced sort of perspective, I've always found it. I found it fascinating because I was saying this is kind of artsy for the film to sort of start throwing in these sort of characters that don't actually mean anything to the actual face value narrative, but are in the pretense hovering around the story like a ghost, and sort of influencing the actions of everyone. But the audience are never given enough information to make anything of him. We start, it starts challenging what is actually happening on screen and challenging what the story that you're supposed to be reading is. So I found that fascinating. I would love to find out where he comes from, what's his deal, and what, if anything, that is referencing. Because he sounds like a Shakespearean character.
To me, he's Puck. He's Puck from Midsummer Night's Dream. He's the guy basically who's this cherub little angel guy who basically comes in and puts a spell on everyone. Everyone gets into weird relationships that throw the story into a very tragic yet comedic way. But then after that, like I was talking about in what episode were we at? Seven Samurai, the forest and all that, he's the one who brings the chaos upon everyone, and he's doing it because he's having fun. The story itself is loosely based on a true story, right? So Thomas Jane's character, I don't have his real name, but that guy actually existed. And even like Dirk Diggler, the guy was basically Johnny Wad, who was a famous porn actor in the 1970s, basically John Holmes. And that actual scene in the house with the Alfred Molina character, that actually happened. There was that murder in the hills and all that. That literally happened to John Holmes and that guy because it was a drug deal that went wrong. A couple of people ended up dead as a result. And it was because of the John Holmes, not the John Holmes character, but the Thomas Jane character, who basically said, you know what? I'm not just here for the drugs, I'm here for the money as well. And he ended up in a shootout. And so, a lot of these things are actually taken from fact. And I think that it's funny that Anderson was like, isn't this interesting that how life imitates art, Yeah,
it could have built a more redemptive arc into his own tragic life and downfall at that point.
So yeah, I mean, even Anderson is going to be using 16mm cameras in order to film specific interviews with the Dirk Diggler character. Those are almost verbatim from what John Holmes was doing in interviews, where he actually built this persona and he thought he lived specific things, but they were all lies. Most of them were lies, right? And even the funny thing is like the Dirk Diggler playing Brock Landers is the same thing as John Holmes playing Johnny Wad. And you'll have a scene, and especially the scene where Luis Guzman his character has made it on a porn set, because he spends the entire movie trying to convince people to just let him on screen so that he can show that he's a movie star now in Hollywood. And there's a scene where Mark Wahlberg's character, Dirk Diggler, is sitting there at a bar where he's wearing this brown tuxedo, and a woman walks up, I think, who's the Amber character, who walks up into that scene as well. That is a remake of a Johnny Wad movie that came out in the 70s. You could probably find it online, and you'll be like, wow, these frames actually match. These are frame-for-frame representations of a porn movie that was made in the 70s.
Well, yeah, I guess if you're going to shoot shit, you better, just shoot shit.
Yeah, exactly. And I thought that it was really interesting to see that Paul Thomas Anderson he's like, you know what? I'm going to be accurate. If I'm going to portray this, I'm going to go all the way. And if people decide to go where my references are, at least they'll see. But he's actually tuning people into porn movies.
Yeah, I was going to say, this must have been hell for people at the time. And it's like, oh my God, he's legitimizing porn. Oh no. Ugh. Okay.
But I wanted to quickly divert the attention into all the references that Paul Thomas Anderson was making. Because a lot of the scenes that are in the movie kind of go, and I don't think they play on the same types of themes that Scorsese is playing. Like You Talking to Me scene in Taxi Driver. There is a mirror shot of Mark Wahlberg's character, Dirk Diggler, in the mirror, kind of just doing his karate moves.
Yeah, doing his karate. And exactly.
And the funny thing is that he's grabbing his gun.
Yeah.
Right? And it's kind of funny because you're like, oh God, I can't believe that he's actually kind of playing on the term gun at the same time as where De Niro is doing it in the mirror. You're talking to me. And it's like, you'll have Dirk Diggler in the mirror just looking at himself going like, yeah, and he has his gun. So that was kind of cool.
Brilliant.
I liked, there's a wonderful, for lack of a better term, the Zolly shot. I don't know, there's another way. It's one of those shots that Hitchcock developed for Vertigo, where he actually pushes the camera forward and then he zooms out in order to give that perspective. In Goodfellas in 1990, Robert De Niro is sitting at a booth again in the coffee shop with Ray Liotta's character just there, and then you'll have that 2-shot where you have that zoom out. He actually, Anderson reuses that shot in the diner sequence with Amber, Jack, Roller Girl, and Dirk all sitting in the coffee shop, where he just brings the camera down in order to create that sequence. His 2 shots are very Scorsese-like.
Yeah.
In the movie itself, when you're watching Boogie Nights, there's a lot of whip pan transitions where he's just like, okay, we're going to change the sequence now, and so there's an overabundance of whip pans that are going to be used in movies like Casino and even in Goodfellas. He's using that. His use of lighting, a lot of lighting that Scorsese decided to use comes from Mean Streets, which he actually used in Departed again later with Jack Nicholson with the cocaine scene and the 2 hookers, where he has one shot that is completely in red light. And in Mean Streets as well, you'll have the Harvey Keitel character that is going to be be completely engulfed in red light. And if I'm not mistaken, he does use it again in Goodfellas. And then when Dirk Diggler comes into the bar and Jack Horner is sitting there with the new guy.
Yeah.
It's completely drenched in red light again.
Red light, that's right.
And it's kind of masterfully shot by Anderson as well, because he has this Dutch tilt shot where the camera is just slightly askew, and that's usually an indication that something wrong is going to happen. There's something that's
disturbing the frame. Yeah.
Exactly. That was one of my things. And the last one that I'm going to bring up that I really loved is the almost comedic slapstick altercation with Don Cheadle's character in the diner sequence at the end.
Oh my God.
Kind of goes to the convenience store sequence in Taxi Driver, where Robert De Niro's character, Travis Bickle, stops an armed robbery by shooting a black man right there to help the store owner, resolve the problem. Whereas Don Cheadle's character has the normal reaction of anyone would have, whereas Travis Bickle is not. He's just an insane guy who decides to shoot someone in a convenience store. You'll have the perfect reaction from Don Cheadle, but the way that the people are shot is in a very comedic manner, where you're like, oh, here's the gratuitous violence that Scorsese does, but I'm actually going to put a little bit of weight to it because we'll have a character in there that has no right to be there.
Yeah, it's this beautiful contrivance. This entire scene, that the fact that he gets this money given to him, like in a very Pulp Fiction-y sense, for like the
exactly,
by that sort of intervention, very much like that. It was so fun.
It was funny, but at the same time, I was like, oh, look at that. Scorsese killed the black guy in his movie, and then Anderson has the black guy surviving, which I thought was really cool, because usually the black guy in 70s movies was the first guy to go.
I so expected it, just because I thought it was going to be trying to go for that exact vibe. That was such a recurring theme at that time, and that he just sidesteps it so neatly. I was so grateful that the story didn't go down that line. I just didn't want to have to deal with it. I really liked his character too. I really liked Buck.
Oh, he was.
So I refused to let him go.
I think Buck is the most relatable character.
Oh, he's so earnest. I love him.
He's lonely. He is looking for a family. He's looking for acceptance. He embodies everything that we feel. He's looking for a connection, right?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, from what I understood is that the characters in Boogie Nights are only as good as their environment allows them to be, right?
Sure.
And so Buck is just trying to transcend that, trying to earn an honest living. And he says it himself, I'm an actor. Stop calling me a pornographer when he goes to the bank loan. I am not a pornographer. I'm an actor. This is my job. I do this for a living, like you're a banker. And I thought that it was interesting for his arc to, through a little bit of dishonesty, was able to achieve his dream. Because that's what you need. Sometimes it's just a little handout. And in that scene, I think that was, I'll say it, a god-like intervention, the same way as in Pulp Fiction with Jules and Vincent, where you're like, that's a goddamn miracle. These three guys are dead. There's a sack of money. I can go. Finally, I'll be able to live my American dream. And he literally is. He's draped in the fucking American flag, red, white, and blue, opening his store at the end of the movie. Out west in Hollywood. He's grateful for it.
Oh my God. It's brilliant.
So I don't know. I have a couple more things I want to highlight, but I'm going to let you talk a little bit.
It's obvious that he does the whole, the long take train, follow you into the crowd thing from the very start of the movie that was in Goodfellas. It's a Scorsese staple,
Yeah.
And he does it exactly right. It's not about showing off the camera. It's not about being overly flowing. It's about narrating the scene without narration. We don't need to be told.
Introduction.
It's character introduction. It's era introduction. It's area introduction. We get to know the bar. We get to know the scene. We get to know the place. We get to know the people. We get to know the locals. We get to know the dialogue. We get to know how flashy this is, which isn't that flashy. And it kind of just settles into the plot neatly. And that, I don't really care. Long takes can be overdone and so on, but I'll take them any day over straightforward narration saying it was 1978 and we were all getting fucking high on coke and crazy times. The porn industry was booming. That's lazy. And this is filmmaking. You can fucking tell stories in 1,000,001 ways. This is the better way to do it.
There you go. And I completely agree. It's supposed to be a visual medium. Your camera shots are supposed to communicate something, and that's why I think I love Anderson so much. Is because he actually uses the camera to tell his story. Right?
Exactly.
I'm positive that if you watch this movie on mute, you'd probably get something from it anyway. It wouldn't be confusing. You'd understand what the fuck is going on.
Definitely.
The one last thing that I want to bring up before we close this this gushing over Boogie Nights is the mid part of the film. Very much my favorite part of the movie. Just before that title card comes up, the mid part of the film is this giant party. And I think that when you talked about it earlier, this idea of a rise and fall, that midpoint of the movie is so perfect in terms of character development, where you're at the tip of the mountain before the downfall starts. And Anderson shows you so well where these characters are and where they are headed, because it's a combination of firsts and lasts.
Right.
And what I mean by firsts and lasts is that I'll start with the firsts. Amber introduces Dirk to cocaine for the first time, so that's his first time. You'll also have Hoffman's character, Philip Seymour Hoffman's character, who tries to kiss Dirk for the first time.
That's right.
Then you're going to also have the lasts on the other side, where William H. Macy's wife's character, anyway, the character she plays, I don't remember her name, she's been basically cheating on him for the entire movie. And this is just the scene before he blows his brains out. He catches her again, so he decides that this is the last time he's going to put up with this thing. And so that's the last time she's going to have sex. This is the last time he's going to breathe. It's the last time he's going to take it. And it also culminates with the idea that it's the last time Jack Horner is going to be using film, and it becomes a lesser medium by using videotape. I loved how Buck as well will make his first connection, right? And then you'll also have the other black woman that's there who makes her first real connection as well with another man who happens to have I think he has a car business, if I'm not mistaken. So you'll have this combination of firsts and lasts that actually really act as this peak in the movie for people that are actually going to start going down one way, or and this is basically the beginning of the end of the movie. At the smack in the middle. I guarantee you, if you look at what the time code is, I can guarantee you that is going to be almost as much time on one side as there is on the other.
Almost certainly.
And I thought that it was kind of cool that once the 80s kicks in, it brings about this lesser work for all these characters that is going to arise. The people that we've come to kind of not necessarily appreciate, but we realize, oh, good God, what the hell's going to happen now? Dirk goes off in his weird, crazy music career, which I'm going to put a song on for us later. And I think that innocence is lost at that part of the film. And like I said, it's the beginning of the end for most characters. And Anderson starts to show his cards where he's trying to say, look, not everything is perfect, but there are characters that are doing their best to get out of it. Not everyone has the right way to go about it. People are going to be going through a certain amount of purgatory. There is a hell that is there as well.
And ultimately, some characters are just not going to make it.
There's that, right? And it goes to play, like, there is a certain loneliness. That's why I think the movie is a little bit about loneliness in these surrogate families, where if you do not stay loyal to who you are or who actually was nice to you, then you're going to pay for it. But if you actually decide to embrace your loneliness, then you might actually find someone who's as lonely as you are, and something beautiful might come of it, such as Buck's character, who meets his wife, and who becomes pregnant, just before he decides
even
to
you can give a quick juxtaposition against Philip Seymour Hoffman's character to Buck, because he doesn't embrace his loneliness and his his sexuality outright. He doesn't get that resolve that he kind of should deserve, in the end, unfortunately. And that is, there are sad elements in this film that do stay sad, I do like this scene. It is very much like what we know now as a general stage play sort of structure. We get that solid culmination to the middle point, and then we'll have our intermission, we'll get our break, we get our black title card, and then we come back and watch people ruin their lives. I mean, watch the story, watch the culmination of the second act continue, and see it lead to the inevitable third act where we get our resolves. It's very traditional as a story. That's something so fascinating about Anderson as a filmmaker that I've gathered so far, and I would love to have been at that point where we kind of watch this and just being one of those people who stumble into what's just a weird film about porn, maybe, and that it turns out to be such an easy to point to, well, that's going to be a classic someday.
Right.
You could just tell in its structure and its ability to tell its story from start to finish without any real justifiable blemishes.
Right.
That you're just looking at a great filmmaker in action, and that's wonderful.
It's great, and I'm glad that you brought up the structure as a last point, because I've been wanting to just say this since the beginning.
Sure.
And the structure of the film is that of an erection.
God damn
it. Isn't it pretty? It starts off
It just
flaccid,
works on so many levels. God damn this fucking film.
all the way up to the tip, and then once the best part has come out of these people, it goes all the way back down, and it culminates with that shot in the mirror at the end. That is how Boogie Nights is shaped. And I guarantee, now that you guys know that, you will not unsee it.
Incredible. It's brilliant. Brilliant. Well, any further notes on Boogie Nights?
No, man. I'm glad that we just finished with that. To me, like I said, I'm going to reiterate this every time we talk about one of his movies. Paul Thomas Anderson, to me, is the best working director right now. Boogie Nights took me a little while to appreciate because I wasn't mature enough, I think, when it came out the first time. I saw it when I was 18. Sure. And I was like, what the hell is this? Why is Marky Mark in a movie? I didn't understand, you know?
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Reynolds
like,
was a has-been, you know?
From the perspective of audiences seeing it at the day, I struggle to get my head around how you could possibly prepare for this, you know? So I totally am fascinated by that.
And I mean, with time, this movie has become a classic for me. It's not a movie that I rewatch a lot, like for the same reasons you do. I'm like, I know enough about it. It's not something that I take a lot of pleasure in watching, because watching people's pain is not necessarily something.
It's something that you want to put yourself through often.
Exactly.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
This is great. I'm gonna have popcorn and watch this. There's no way.
Yeah, watch some guy be miserable for 2 hours.
But that's the thing. I mean, this is what the difference is between watching a competent filmmaker make a film versus, other people that are just making movies. This is the clear difference for me when you're able to make a movie about this particular subject matter and make it interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
Compelling, So that's it. I don't know. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
I'm just happy that we've gotten through our initial stage, the Scorsese stage in this evolution of Anderson. I'm really looking forward to our next one in 2 weeks.
All right. So I have homework for you. If you're going to watch Magnolia, do yourself a favor and watch Robert Altman's Shortcuts. Okay? So watch Shortcuts, and then we'll be able to talk about how the influence of Shortcuts plays very heavily into Magnolia. It's a wonderful, wonderful picture. I like it a lot. And so that's it. So that's it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for tuning in to episode 10 of the ASC podcast.
Hey, a decade of episodes in the making.
There you go. My name is Jason Michael. You can find me at film_faculty on Twitter, and also at film faculty on WordPress. We have a bunch of stuff there, reviews that you guys could check out. I'm going to be trying to write a little bit more because Lee's putting a little bit more pressure on me. And that's it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. And yeah, please, if you guys have time, go send a review in on iTunes. We'd love to hear your feedback on the show. We also are using SoundCloud because, to me, there was a wonderful medium so that you guys can comment on the tracks. I would love to see you guys interact with the tracks so that you can give us some more feedback there and create a discussion. Big shout out to the guys at In Session Film. Again, thank you guys for retweeting all of our stuff. And to Nerd on Nerd Podcast, to Yuche, and also to Courtney Young over at Film Vibes, on-screen review. Wonderful person to interact with on Twitter. Give those people a follow. If I forgot someone, I won't forget you next time, and I'm going to lend the mic over to Lee.
Yeah, well, I would say maybe Matty Neggs as well. He
Sorry, Matty.
retweets almost everything I throw at him, so I always appreciate that.
Matty, great. Absolutely. Wonderful guy.
I've been Lee Brady. I write for and own the website Big Picture Reviews, and you can see that at bigpicturereviews.co.uk. I do modern reviews along with a team. You can also see me on Twitter at BigPicReviews. Hopefully you'll tune in next time. Past the Tom Cruise, if that's not your boat. We'll be doing more Anderson 3 weeks from now.
So on that note, this is us signing off. Take care. Have a good one.
Bye.
You got the touch. You got the power. After all is said and done, you never walk, you never run. You're a winner. at your best when the going gets rough. You've been put to the test, but
This conversation can serve no purpose anymore. Goodbye.